My name is Al Gini, and I'm professor emeritus at the Quinlan School of Business, where I was in the management department, and I taught business ethics and leadership for, I guess I was in the management department and the School of Business for about 23 years, where I had a joint appointment in arts and science and management and business.
And tell us a little bit about your background, where'd you go to school, how'd you get into business ethics, what brought you to the field?
Well, I think brought me to the field is the more interesting part. My background is, it's so far back, I'm not sure I could recall it all. I remember exactly, by the way, every comment I'm going to make today, I want to make a disclaimer, is my memory of it and my interpolation of it. And I remember exactly what's happening. We had hired Pat and a guy called Tom Donaldson to teach a little ethics courses for us, because the dean, who was a draconian kind of guy, said something really brilliant. Well, you're teaching these ethics courses, and I had mentioned it once or twice as well, but they've got nothing to do with business. People are going in and teaching these ethics courses, say, well, Kant said this, so don't steal. Mills said that, so only do this under the circumstances. But it wasn't integrated in any way. And then there was a movement going, I think, nationally, just slowly. And Pat and Tom and a couple of people in Chicago, Bob, Pat, his name, please, Bob, from DePaul.
Bob Cook.
Bob Cook, thank you very, very much. He facilitated. But Pat and Tom, in a very real sense, formulated and created, and perhaps one of the first books, if not the first textbook on it. And at that time, I was assistant chair or something like that. And I was teaching everything. I mean, I was teaching jolly numbers and William James and aggression and war, and even in those days, some courses in the environment. And I was kind of floundering around. And Pat actually said to me and Tom, well, why don't you think about doing this? And they gave me a list of books to read, a list of books that would have choked 3 or 4 individuals, I might point out, and said, why don't you try to do this? And they actually mentored me for about a year and then said, okay, let's schedule a course for you. And that's how it began for me. I was always the lesser light, but I was kind of responding to their direction. And then I realized that I've been teaching ethics, and I was teaching what Spinoza, what Hume said about Spinoza and what Kant's rejection of Hume. And to me, it was becoming speculative harmonics. And then what business ethics offered ethicists was real cases. I mean, just not talking about what does one do in a hypothetical situation, but how does one handle a real case? And it also was this change of events that was occurring in our society, Vietnam and post-Vietnam world, and the Nixon fallout, so on and so forth. And so there was a concern about, how leadership ethics, and it was a privilege to join in.
That's an exciting story. Was there an objective that you had once you got going, something you hoped to accomplish or contribute through research, through publication, through teaching?
Not that it was a plan. I mean, I was trying to keep up, and suddenly everything exploded. And this is even before we got the journal going. Suddenly everything exploded. And so one had to keep up. But then let's talk about the journal separately, because that's a whole other phenomenon. Suddenly I realized that I had fallen upon the right issues. And if I've made any contributions, it's at the level of work, talking about work and the role of the labor and the role of the worker and the role of labor in business and leadership. And it took me a while. I slowly published a number of articles on leadership, but then finally a book, which was part of that series from Wiley Press on business ethics, so on and so forth, with Ron Green, which was a wonderful experience. And I became fascinated with that. I became fascinated with work as this dynamic, this thing that, this monkey that all of us have on our backs, and how it erases us, how it wears us down, how it beats us up, and how we make such bad decisions because of overwork or greed or how that all plays in. And then the vital role of leadership, and that no matter what the constituents of an organization may want, without proper leadership, it just doesn't happen. And how that important that was. So I think if I made any contribution, it was in the 4 or 5 monographs that I did on various topics of leadership and various topics of work. And I've always been fascinated by work, and I'm always fascinated by the fact that I survived a career and actually did some good work.
That's great. What advice do you have for labor, right? What should employees do to survive this, Al?
You know, there's a wonderful paradigm going on right now with Amazon. By all accounts, Amazon is a wonderful organization. By all accounts, Amazon it gives freely to many worthy causes, et cetera, et cetera. By all accounts, the directorship of Amazon has been gifted and brilliant and taken wonderful risks and done some wonderful things. And yeah, and by all accounts, they pay well, given $15 an hour. Except workers have no rights once they enter the workplace, and they're forced to put in overtime. They're forced to work other days, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, the continuous problem, one of the questions you sent us, the continuous problem of business ethics is going to be this delicate dance between labor, corporations, and profit, the profit motive, the great incentive for capitalism, and the great devil of capitalism in some sense. So I think it's just fascinating. We're still fighting the battles. You know, what rights do workers have? What rights do corporations have? And how do we balance that between each other?
Sounds like an eternal question indeed.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the journal. You mentioned that. I think it'd be nice to hear that story.
Well, I feel that I've done some good academic work on work and leadership, as I said, but I think my real contribution to the field has been BEQ, Business Ethics Quarterly. I remember exactly, and what was happening was when the field was growing, and we actually had meetings, and we had the society, but there was only 1 or 2 journals to publish in, and the major journal, of course, was Journal of Business Ethics. But the Journal of Business Ethics was mostly business with a little, philosophical bent to it here and there. It was hard to get in there, and then there was even I don't want to put them down. There was even a question of, well, do we really want to publish there because of this and that? And now I know, of course, there's A, B, and C journals. Well, there was only journals at that time. And there wasn't an outlet for philosophers. And I remember being at a society meeting, and Pat and I were sitting at a table with Norm Bowie. Seriously. And Pat and I had discussed this in the background. Tom had left by that point. So Pat was in charge, and I was her loyal foot soldier. And I was proud for that. And I was glad of that. I like the captain. Okay, I was a captain. And we sat there, and honest to God, and I remember this correctly, and if I'm not remembering it correctly, and Pat has a better interpretation, just go with mine. Anyway, we said, we got to create this journal. We got to do something. And Pat says, well, I'm going to talk to administration. I said, okay, if you talk to administration, I'll do this and this and that. Okay, and we did it right there. And then Pat, who was always, if you'll allow the male metaphor, Mr. Outside, out there soliciting money, getting people in, and convinced a university which never had supported a journal before, okay, we'll support you. And we'll give Pat a reduction in classes, and we'll give Al a reduction in classes, and we'll give you an assistant. Let's not forget a guy called Mark Schneider, who was the backbone of that. He was really the scribe, the person who took care of all these details when computers were really not even able to do much besides, the double digits kinds of things. Mark made everything work. And so we did this, and Patricia was always the one going out there, and every day, we had to handle real manuscripts. They sent in a manuscript. We made 3 copies of it. Then I had to figure out who to send a copy to and who to keep a copy to, and let's not lose this copy. And we did that, and I spent 30 hours a week working on the journal, without question. 30 hours a week working on a journal. Not that I'm complaining. That's what you had to do. But it grew. So I remember the first journal, Ron Green was in it. It was a real thin little, thing. And is anybody going to buy into this? And what are we going to do? And Norm Bowie then publishes an article, and then we get another, and then another and another. And it became something of real value and real importance. Not because I was simply the scribe. I was simply the editor here.
Editor.
I was a man, but I made decisions, but the quality of it was all dependent on the articles we got. Nothing that I did except to organize and so on and so forth. And, oh, I guess I had to beg people to review after a certain point and threaten physical violence. But except for that, the reality is the journal became the face of the Society of Business Ethics. Journal became the place where major players in the field developed their skills and demonstrated their expertise. And I did it for 23 years. And even to the point where Pat doesn't remember it exactly the same way, that my nephew and I kind of did a design for the front cover. We did everything, but Pat and I did everything. And the monies that she got, and so on and so forth. Okay, I remember she reminded me that I saved money someplace. I think I killed somebody. I don't remember, but we did save some money along the way. And there was a
Didn't
time
spend money. That was the thing.
oh yeah, I kept saying no. I was Mr. No. Okay, I remember that.
Great.
But we made this incredibly important vehicle for the field. I myself, and I don't think Pat did much either because we were editors. I think I published one article and one book review in there because I was asked, but I never, submitted to it. Wasn't the best thing for me to do, I realize in retrospect, for my own career. But then I developed another, career as writing books rather than articles, which was fine for me. But it was happy work. I must say, in retrospect, there was a lot of drudgery to it, but isn't that true in everything in life? I mean, even as scholars, when all of us had been at a meeting where they've celebrated our virtuosity about our book on Adam Smith, et cetera, but Pat doesn't want to mention the fact that it took me 2.5 years to write that damn thing. It was some more work that I want to admit, right? And so, no.
Oh, well,
Pat,
I don't know. Anyway.
No. I mean, I'm talking about the hard work that you have to put into writing a book, right? I mean, they see the book and they go, oh, that's wonderful, but they don't know the work you put into it, et cetera, et cetera. But I think our journal really became a barometer of the field and a yardstick of our expertise.
You mentioned books as well and said that's what you turned to. Tell us about your books. Tell us about your writing. Tell us about your sense of humor.
It's a little awkward. Well, yes, I've been teasing before we're off mic. I was teasing about my personal life, but I've had a very happy and good life. But yeah, I had a divorce from the mother of my children. My first wife died, and I married my longtime sweetheart from college, and we had children. We had a wonderful life, and it ended, unfortunately. And I was living at this lovely townhouse that I was fortunate enough to come up with. And I was having the midlife crisis. I was 44 years old, 42 years old. And I didn't know what I wanted to do for work anymore. And even work had been ruined for me. And then I realized work, tutti cosa, it's everything. And how work is salvation and necessity, creativity and a burden, a pathway and a dead end, depending on how you approach. So I was asked to give a series of lectures at St. Pat's in Chicago on work. And that turned into a book called My Job, Myself, a work in the creation of the modern individual, which is still in print and still sometimes used. It was used at Gettysburg College for the senior read. And I was brought in as a lecturer to talk about that. And that's happened a couple of times. And I thought that was the apotheosis. I'd done everything I could possibly do. I have nothing else to say. And I realized how that applied to business ethics. And I had done, and I also did an anthology on work, which was important. And somewhere along the line, Tom Donaldson bequeathed to me the business ethics book, which I tried to integrate. And I kept that going for about 20 years. The casebook in business ethics. But the book on work led to a book on leisure, because the other side of that was leisure. And so the importance of being lazy came out. It wasn't written for a philosophical audience necessarily. It was written for an intelligent audience, but to talk about the other side and how important it is, lassitude wisdom only comes from lassitude to some extent, but I wanted to talk about that. And then it led to leadership. And I published a great deal in articles on leadership and how important that is. And I think Tom Donaldson reviewed the book, and Barbara Ehrlichman from Harvard said that people talk about leadership as an activity. They don't talk about the philosophical presuppositions. And that was a lovely review. And that's what we try to do, to talk about the philosophical grounding of what ethics, what leadership is. It's really in ethics. And I've spent the last 4 years an NPR commentator about, not necessarily talking about politics, the politics of the past president, but rather his demeanor and his lack of character. And I'm doing a show next week on that, just to look at the demeanor of individuals, how they carry themselves, and how leadership is also a very human art form, and how we practice it. And so I felt that those connected nicely to business ethics. And I'm looking up at the shelf, and I wrote a couple of books on ethics and a couple of books on business ethics, and somewhere along the line, I wrote a book by Why It's Hard to Be Good, which is everything I've pearled or purloined on the art of ethics itself. And then I've ended my career with a joke, with 2 books on humor. And it all stepped from my Uncle Joe, who every time he saw me until the week he died, and this was also in Italian, it loses something in English, he would grab me in the imbraccio, and just before the kiss, he would say, "Did you hear the one about?" and tell me a joke. Rarely ever did he repeat himself. Somewhere along the line in my rebellious teenage years, which weren't that damn rebellious, said, "Uncle Joe, can't go so far. Why are you telling me? Why are you always telling me a joke? This is silly." And he pushed back and he says, "Stupido, if I didn't love you, why would I want to give you the gift of laughter? Why would I want to make you happy?" And the last time I saw him, he said, "I'm going to die now. Not so fun." So I kept that in the back of my head. And I wrote a book by The Importance of Being Funny. And ironically got a lot of traction out of that. Got a lot of pleasure out of that. Even former students who reviewed it said, "I think we were the test cases for this book, because 30 years ago, I remember him telling jokes." And, I could always repeat a joke. And then my colleague, kind of the person who's replaced me at Loyola, Abraham Singer, replacing me is not fair to say. He is about 20 leagues smarter than I will ever be now, and he's only 32. Was kind enough, because we have a wonderful sense of humor. We wanted, and he has a political theorist, so we wanted to talk about satire. So we wrote a book called Sanity of Satire, which unfortunately, because of COVID, to quote Hume, it sort of fell stillborn from the press, but now getting some coverage. So it was a nice way to end. I left laughing.
Al, you spent your career at Loyola, right?
Yeah, 51 years, but who's counting?
Loyola University, Chicago.
Yes.
And talk a little bit about what the administration expected from you and your role, and were they supportive, not supportive, enthusiastic, not enthusiastic? What role did they play in the development and support of your career, if any?
Well, full disclosure, I did have a couple offers to leave here and there, and never much wanted to. Maybe once or twice I was really, really tempted, because Loyola was so supportive of this whole business ethic experience from the very first time, that would start with Pat and Tom and myself as a lesser light. We were not the Holy Trinity. It was the double Trinity. It was a dualism with myself. Okay. They always were supportive. And the Jesuits have always, this notion of justice. When people say, "Well, you teach at a Catholic school," I say, "Oh, no. I teach at a Jesuit school. There's a difference." The Jesuits' concern with social justice, the Jesuits' concern with social well-being, the Jesuits' concern with ethics has been paramount through tradition. You know, our last president, Mike Garanzini, went to the philosophy department and said, "I'm not asking you, I'm telling you, that even though there's a 3-course requirement in philosophy, one of the courses has to be applied ethics. It has to be ethics. This does not mean the applied ethics in the School of Business. No student will leave Loyola without a theoretical course in ethics." The department rebelled a little bit, saying, "Well, that's too much to handle." I said, "That's your job. That's what we're going to do." I mean, that kind of gravitas. When the Lincoln 200th anniversary came up, he gave me $250,000 to talk about Lincoln ethics leadership. And we brought in Doris Kearns Goodwin. 1,500 people showed up. She didn't leave until midnight to sign every book that came in front of her. It was an amazing experience and the celebration of social justice and virtue. And it still is. And when Pat and Tom created the courses initially, that dean got up. I remember, and I think Pat will recall this too, and this man did not celebrate anybody because he was very self-absorbed, I think. Celebrated them, just praised them to the sky, deservedly so. But what Pat and Tom and then I was trying to do was live out this thing. And again, my draw to business ethics is this, it's applied. I mean, otherwise, again, to use a phrase, it's speculative harmonics. It's teaching aesthetics. And I know Pat is into aesthetics, and as I like to dabble in it, but aesthetics is this ephemeral, kind of thing. But we can actually say, gee, Enron was wrong, wasn't it? Anybody want to defend that in the room here? Madoff was perhaps unacceptable conduct, et cetera, et cetera. And that's been very gratifying to see that we've actually, helped create the intellectual background for Congress to act on things, for businesses to be concerned about things. I think even our concern with the environment is predicated on this general concern for ethical conduct in business.
Al, have we solved any of the traditional problems in business ethics?
No, we've enunciated them. We've brought them to the forefront. We've demonstrated that they're real. We've set them out, but the dynamic is still here. Labor, corporations, profit. How do we balance all three? And I would say categorically that capitalism has done more than any ism in the world to help the general well-being of individuals in the world. Not every individual, but the general well-being. Everyone's boat was lifted to some extent, even though too many boats are still way, way down there. But the struggle is constant. It's like you have to teach literature every year to a new generation of learners. I think we're talking about, at least we're on the table now. I mean, before every joke was, oh, it's an oxymoron, da, 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 da. It's not a funny joke anymore. Nobody tells that joke anymore because it's not. We've done good things, but doing good things means you have to do it again and again and again. It's like, as I've learned getting older, you don't stop working out. If you stop working out, you stop. And so I think with business ethics, we've solved many issues. We've raised many concerns. We've established new levels of expectation, but it's a continuous assault.
So there's work yet to be done.
Yes, indeed. I am concerned, however, I am concerned that our success may lead some to think that they need fewer of us. That is, people concerned with business ethics. And I worry about that. For example, and I think perhaps Pat could talk to this at another time. There was a clear preponderance or balance between the business people and the philosophers in the early society. But in some sense, and I want to say this carefully, I'm open to be corrected, that the driving force were philosophers, PhDs in philosophy, doing this, creating the society, creating concern with values. And now I'm not saying they're not prepared, et cetera, et cetera. Now we're seeing not enough philosophers in the field. And I'm hoping to see more in the field, and seeing more philosophers taking up positions in schools of business. Pat and I, Tom Donaldson, there's a series of people. Ron Green worked at his school of business as well. But we had positions in schools of business. That gave us more gravitas. That meant we had to be dealt with. That meant the school was serious about it. It just wasn't the add-on course. It just was, okay, we got to take, every freshman has to take a course in poetry. And who are the poetry teachers? Well, we just hired them. No. That meant, no, we had a chair in schools of business, and we had credentials, and we brought something to that. So I'm wondering about the politics and the pedagogy of the future, but not the need for the discipline. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And it's an intriguing perspective. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, you mentioned the Society for Business Ethics a number of times, and you talked about its role with the journal. Can you talk a little bit about the impact the society has had on you or on the development of the field beyond the journal?
I'm very proud of the society. The society for the first 10 years was Pat Werhane. Boom. She was in charge of everything, and it just kept going and going and going. It is the fruit of her labors. And then, yes, there were many people who came in, Norm Bowie, and I'm hesitant to start naming people because I'll forget somebody that should be named. But the society gave us teeth, gave us credibility in the profession. I remember, frankly, Pat and Tom were gone, and I was still at Loyola, and I got pushback from a chair saying, "Well, you're doing applied. You're not really significant." And real pushback, serious pushback, and that person wound up not just disliking me, disliked a lot of people, and so part of it was political. But the reality was, for a long time, a lot of our brethren went, we do theory. We're Hegelians. We're not Jamesians, and that was a problem. But the society and the journal, which is the main arm of the society, and the meetings changed that. We were theoreticians. We talked. We were serious. And the best part of the first 10, 15 years of society is there weren't a lot of us, and we all talked, and we all were friends, and we all debated, and nobody left the room after a paper because the best part was the conversation afterwards. And we didn't attack each other. We critiqued, talked, and developed. It was wonderful. We conversed. It was so Socratic, and it's become a kind. I don't want to criticize because I've stopped going the last 10 years just because I couldn't cover everything in reality. We become a very professional group, and I'm sure there are still lovely moments, but it's we're a little more formal now, and everybody has to look at the pecking order and all that kind of stuff. And but we did wonderful things. And I think that the society established us as serious thinkers, and we met each other, and the friendships were based on intellectual camaraderie, and then there were real friendships, the camaraderie. I think of Ron Green as my best friend, and a towering mind who went into business ethics kind of at a sidebar and went, "Oh, this is fascinating, this is interesting," so on and so forth. And then we knew we were doing something. Here was the proof of the pudding. Businesses hired us. I had a consulting career for 20 years. I couldn't believe it. A couple of years, I made more than my salary at school. And it wasn't because I was even looking for it. I don't think I solicited anyone. They just came, and I know that's true for a number of my colleagues. And I was by no means the leader in this. Most of it's small stuff. But a couple of major firms, a couple of major organizations. It was fascinating. We felt like we're doing something.
And you probably were doing something. I expect you actually were doing something. So talk a little bit about that consulting impact. We've talked about the academics and the theory. You mentioned now your career in consulting. What impact did your ideas have on your consulting clients?
It's presumptuous to say, that I rectified all the wrongs. But Advocate Health Center and Northwest Airlines, which is no longer in business, not because of what I did. And Carson Perry Scott's also gone.
That's really
Yeah, that's great. So two of my major clients no longer exist, thanks to me. That's that's funny. I'm sorry. They heard of me. I had this lovely little radio career. I was NPR's resident philosopher for almost 30 years. And so I would get picked up. And also, I'm sure every professor, your students become adults and get better jobs than you and call you up. That's how it started. A couple students, it was at Carson Perry Scott's, and the Pete Maxwell, I think was his name, wanted to look at retail again and thievery and what's going on with employees and how we handle this. So we did a series of films and a series of touches and this, and that led to Northwest Airlines. The major Alan Cox was there at Carson Perry Scott's. That led to Northwest Airlines. And so for 4 years, I flew to Minnesota twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays, or sometimes on the weekends, made these educational films, went to board meetings, kind of was, the guru in the corner. And then they would ask a pithy question and I would give a pithy response and they would give me a pithy check and, but the reality was they were really interested. And I think what all good business ethics people do, they're good translators. You got to translate it. You just can't walk in there and say, well, St. Anselm's second argument, of course, applies to this, and I won't bother you with that argument because I'm sure you're aware of it. And so let's go on. No, we talked about collectivity. We talked about, the wonderful, one of my favorite metaphors was from the Stoics. The Stoics would also say, if you want to understand what ethical responsibility is, well, there's no such thing as a bee. Bees only exist in collectivity with other bees. So since you have others, you have responsibilities. And said, oh, okay, that's a good insight. I never thought of that. Right. When you're on that island alone, when you're, you're a king of the castle, the minute you find, what's his name found Friday on the sands, the reality changed. And then when they found pirates bearing treasure in each other on the sand, that reality changed again. I'm talking, of course, about Help Me, Robinson Crusoe. So I had real impact. That one led to the other. And I know Pat had that experience. I know Tom Donaldson had the experience. I know Ron Green had the experience. Not that we can make a whole life out of it, but it was wonderful to be called out of the institution, the academic institution, and to be recognized that institutions do something. And we offer something. Now, in schools of business, for example, that's always been expected. If you don't produce good accountants, we're not going to hire from you anymore. If you don't produce good management people, we're not going to hire from you anymore. But those are the applied arts. Suddenly, there was an article in yesterday's New York Times about liberal arts. We can't lose them. It changes everything. And suddenly the liberal arts were in the field of business and being respected for that. And those are heady times. I really felt I was having an impact because, frankly, you don't know if you're really impacting the undergraduates until when they're 30, they call you up. Or now I meet them on the street and they'll say to me, I don't remember anything in school except that one book you taught, or you said this on October 3rd, 1982, like I'm going to remember. And I've had that tattooed across my arm, and I've kept that in my life. We don't get immediate responses. That's why I often regret it and become an MD, because at least I saved, I helped. But we're in there, and most undergraduates now, they look at you as if Is this going to be in video? Can I get this? Do I have to show up for class? Is this going to, you know, can I have a copy of your slides so I don't even have to be here anymore? So it's been gratifying. And I think if you talk to some of the senior members in business ethics, they'll say that it's been gratifying to have an FAct.
I think the other place you've had an impact is through your work as the NPR resident philosopher. That was a cool position. I recall listening to you many, many days on the radio and just enjoying your commentary, sometimes even laughing out loud.
Well, that was the point. I think that's actually, you called me after a show. I remember that correctly. And that's how I would get contacts, et cetera, et cetera. That was extended recently when one of my producers on NPR went to WGN for 2 years. I was on WGN, but he then got canceled at WGN, GeoEnergy Change, and so on and so forth. But I miss that, except it was a lot of work. I have to tell you, Rich, and that, you know, you're on 15 minutes every 10 days. 15 minutes took 8 hours. You know,
8 hours of preparation.
Yeah. So it was, but it was, and thank God for NPR. I mean, Bob Edwards interviewed me a couple of times nationally and said, I don't know, you know, I don't know anybody who's ever had that title. And I said, well, I don't abuse it. He says, no, it's wonderful. It means we care about ideas. And that's exactly what NPR stands for. Yeah.
No, that was a lot of fun. Al, before we went on camera, you told us your entire name, which is lovely, and which you just Al Gini, but there's more to it than that. Tell us.
Yeah. Well, you know, you're named in the Italian tradition after your father's father, but my mother was no waif in any way, and so my mother said, well, "What about my father?" You know, so. What they did was one grandfather was Aldo and one grandfather was Ferruccio. So I became Alfred, which is not an Italian name, or Alfredo, which is not really an Italian name, a common Italian name, but more Spanish. So my full name is Alfredo Romando Giuseppe Gini. The Gini is the Gini coefficient. That's part of the family, but they're in the South. We're from Perugia, not Perugia, outside of Florence. I'll think of it in a second, but we're from Tuscany, and my father's from Tuscany, my mother's from Sicily. And by the way, that was a mixed marriage when my parents got married. So, but I only spoke Italian at home. And I went to school. I remember, I'm surprised I ever became a teacher, because the first day in school, the little nun said, "Alfred Gini," and I said, "Si, sono io." He said, "Alfred, you can't speak Italian here. You have to speak English." She said, "Io parlo inglese ora, io non parlo italiano." She came, I said to her, I am speaking English right now. I'm not speaking Italian. She came down the aisle and slapped me. I mean, whacked me a couple times. I never spoke Italian again in class. But there were 64 of us in a class. Most of us spoke Italian at home and then spoke English. And I couldn't distinguish between it all the time. I could go either way. And she was, I realized now, all of 21 and 90 pounds wet. And she couldn't allow an offensive opportunity. And she didn't. She didn't. Yeah, she was totally in charge after that, right?
Wow. So I've asked a bunch of questions. Let me turn to Pat, see if you've got any questions you wanted to ask. And then Tom will give you a shot at it. And then we'll end up, Al, with you making any final thoughts, sharing any final thoughts. What did you come here to say that you didn't get to?
No, I only want to say thank you for doing this. I'm glad we could schedule this. It was hard, but thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Well, we put Pat, no matter years have passed, et cetera, et cetera. I think you did great work. You did important work. And I was very glad that you took me on.
Well, who else would do it? There's no one else in this huge philosophy department. They all poo-pooed us.
Yeah, but we all did.
Wrong.
Yeah, we all did okay, didn't we? Who remembers any of those people? Nobody. But I am, you know, things have changed, but I am really, really grateful
well,
to your catalytic push.
Well, you saved the journal, so we'd be bankrupt and gone.
And we wouldn't be having this conversation. Thank you.
And Tom always has a good question or two.
I'm just laughing too much.
Then buy my book, Tom. You could be the first one this year.
I'm very interested in what you're going to do now. Is your retirement going to be dolce far niente, or are you?
No posso fare così.
Have you things to do? You've something else going on.
Well, here's what I'm very proud of. I've decided not to redo the novel In the Drawer. That is, I don't want to be the embarrass myself as an 80-year-old man producing a novel. It got sold years ago as a script, so I'm thankful for that. And I made a lot of money on that as a script that never was used by the De Niro company. And I'm not going to do that. You know, to pick this up that I wrote just seems wrong. And I've been asked to do a couple of textbooks. I'm not interested. I may do this book on Stoicism, may, but I'll tell you the truth. They put me in, they begged me to join the retirement committee. I didn't want to. I've been to enough committee meetings. To end your career as a chair that's the punishment. That's why you retire, right? And they're all bored. And so, Al, what are you doing? Give us tips. What are you doing boredom? And so I've been retired for about 6 months. I've been retired since the COVID. So I've been retired for 14 months. And I said, tell me, what do you do most? Picture yourself at 45 again. The kids are teenagers. You're midway through your career. You're running this at school, running this. What did you want to do more than anything else? And everybody said at the same time, read. I said, well, damn it, do that. So I read, I get up in the morning, I work out, I read 6 to 8 hours a day.
What kind of stuff?
Well, this is sad. Formal philosophy offers me no comfort. That is, reading Hegel or reading St. Thomas or reading Kant offers me no comfort. It's too abstract. And theology, sadly, when you run out of reason, all that's left is imagination or magic. And that's what theology is to me. But Stoicism, from Socrates, I read Xenophon last week, Pat, just to prove my point here. And Xenophon, and then the Stoics, there's some real brilliance there, some practical brilliance, kind of a la William James. And that's been offering me some comfort. But I think I don't have enough to offer. I think it would take 10 years to have something new to offer to the field. So I'm just going to enjoy it. And I'm reading the big history books. I just read 1,900 pages of Adolf Hitler.
Oh, good heavens.
My God, Pat, it's brilliant. The German chap, and from a German historian's mea culpa, max mea culpa point of view, saying that we're responsible for Hitler. Hitler was something, but we're also responsible for Hitler. It's a brilliant analysis. I've been reading history, and I think Truman is right. All of history has already been played out except for the new players coming along. And so I'm learning philosophy by reading history. And it's really comforting, really, really comforting. Now, part of it is COVID. I can read 8 hours a day because you can't do much more. I haven't been able to go, I will go back to Africa again and teach. I've been teaching for the Jesuits in Africa for the last 10 years. And I will go back there to teach. As soon as I possibly can. Yeah.
Whereabouts were you teaching then?
Well, I was teaching in Joburg, but now I do the rump. I do Joburg, Cape Town, and lots of little small towns in between. And I'm very interested in experiencing these little South African towns. And Durban, with my dear friend Raymond Pierre, who runs the Dennis Hurley Society. So he hires me out to corporations, individuals, and then I kind of transfer that. The work they do there is just beyond comprehension.
Thank you so very much for joining us for this Business Ethics Pioneers discussion. It's great to hear your reflections and to laugh with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let's hope that this is just not an archival moment. And let's hope that it is something that people access, and not for me, but for everyone. Thank you, folks. Bye-bye.